Well, hello again. We're on day 3 of transforming the teaching and learning environment virtual conference. Yes, I'm still Bob Ailes. I'm your moderator. Don't forget, after this session, we have the Wall Street Journal doing a workshop. The one they did yesterday, I personally found pretty interesting, talking about many of the resources they have available for higher education. This session today is Mind the Gap, Rethinking Your EdTech Stack. So like a stack of pancakes, right? We have with us Reed Dixon, who's the program manager for faculty development at Pima Online. He designs and teaches courses and learning experiences for faculty in online pedagogy, instructional design, and educational technology. And in his spare time, he cleans the floor, empties the waste baskets, right? Reed, let me turn it over to you now.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Bob. It's great to be with you and great to be with everybody in the room. Sharing a screen as we get started. Again, this session I'm calling Mind the Gap. We're all thinking about what kind of technologies we want to be using, and this includes teachers thinking about their classrooms and institutions thinking about their overall solutions for how to engage students using all the ed tech as it's emerging. This particular workshop, we're going to dive in and look at what's missing. In other words, where are the gaps in our practices relating to ed tech that might support our practice? And I like to focus on the pedagogy, just like our colleges at large and our academic learning technologies team. We're all focused on pedagogy-driven tech rather than tech-driven pedagogy. And so we're going to take a closer look at pedagogical questions. We're going to begin by reflecting as a group on our favorite e-learning apps, and then we're going to dive into a broader consideration of how we meet the needs that are emerging for our students and our teachers. I want to start off with a question which is pretty basic around what we love. I want to know 3 apps that you're using right now and why. Whatever comes to mind. And I will put into the chat feed a Padlet if you'd like to use that, or you could just share back into the chat feed itself. Again, 3 things that you're using and why. And if anybody wants to share their video and just say something they've tried recently that they're celebrating, I'd love to know what that is. And I will put into the chat feed a Padlet if you prefer that one. Here's a Padlet in the background. Again, any app you've used recently that at least you're pleased with, something that speaks to you as an educator or as an instructional designer. Bob begins with Reed Speaker and Zoom and Bob's LMS. Thank you, Bob, for that. So if any ATs or assistive technologies come to mind, that would be great to know. I'll share one note that's kind of an interesting aside, which is that we have some tools that I wasn't even aware of initially that came about through our Office of Accessibility that have enterprise-wide solutions that everybody can use, like Orbit Note. And so sometimes you don't always know what's going to be there. I'm going to share my screen as the results come through into this Padlet, and I'll zoom in a little bit more too. So we should see this Padlet. Again, Blackboard, first thing that comes out. If anybody loves Blackboard or has any comments, please feel free to upvote your peers of things that you really like, or if you have questions. Someone else mentioned Perusal, great engagement from students reading challenging papers. I'm really interested in social annotation tools, both this one and Hypothesis, for the ability to engage students in shared discussions around text, or what's called text-dependent inquiry in the K-12 level, where they get to highlight and have a shared discussion in small groups on a large text. So we got Pictograph and Canva for infograph development, PlayPosit, Perusal, and Packback, and also Slack, if you're able to use that at your institution for collaborative work projects. and real world use. Once they leave the college, they can keep using the tool, unlike a lot of the tools that we're using. Any comments that anyone would like to share? If you want to unmute yourself before we move on to the next section of activity. All right, let's keep moving. And if comments are coming through in the chat feed, I should double check the chat feed here for a moment. We also had a couple of other points coming in for Greenshot. Brett Foster is sharing, as well as Zoom and Brightspace, which is a LMS, and more words for Harmonize and Blackboard Alley, Zoom, and Read Speaker. Please feel free to share any comments or thoughts about why you love these if you'd like to, and otherwise we will keep moving.
Well, I'll share. Particularly Read Speaker has been a favorite of mine for a number of years. It's easy to use, and well, also what's important when you're talking EdTech, it's affordable. It does a lot of, you get a great value for it. Besides, what it does very well, and that's what you want from EdTech.
Thank you, Bob. So I imagine if we were all sitting around the table at a conference, we might go at length at this, but since we're in a larger group and this is being recorded, we may not feel as comfortable sharing where we're at. I'm going to give a quick snapshot of some of the things that I've seen around at other institutions. Again, we're going to skip this question for now, but I want you to hold on to it, which are, where are your app gaps right now? That's what we're going to dig into in this session. Are we doing crisis-driven collections of apps so far, or we're just trying to meet the pedagogical pain points, as I like to call them? Or are we going towards vision-driven stuff? So maybe if this is our pain point, we might be thinking, well, how are we managing live video meetings for synchronous teaching? What tools are we going to use for that? Or how are we helping students create digital learning artifacts right now instead of just papers that, might be more problematic with the emergence of generative AI? What other alternatives do we give students to create learning products outside of papers? And that might be, incidentally, video creation. It might be creating websites. It might be creating other tools. What are we supporting them with, especially if they're fully online asynchronous students? Then we think of the tools that are built into our LMSs often, and integrating with those tools that are interactive in some way. And that's a pretty broad piece. Some of us have those, some of those don't. Spatial thinking tools, I don't think a lot of us are using. We'll get back to what I'm suggesting here by spatial thinking. Broadly, we have a moment now, I think we did a lot of tech-driven acquisition post-COVID, but now we have a moment to pause and think, well, what is our vision for the technology that we want to be bringing into our institutions? How do we build our own capacity as educators? And how do we advance innovation? So local innovation, you may have your finger on the pulse of already, but that's something that we want to always try to keep in mind and lift up in our practice. And then the question of how do we build our vision through needs assessment? You may be already running pilots like we are, and Adam Baldry, who's on the call with us right now, is doing an excellent job running existing pilots in which we're gathering data constantly from folks with new apps that we're trying out. But when I think of needs assessments, I'm not just thinking about students, I'm thinking of students plus teachers. And so this is something to think about as we move forward. What are the needs of our teachers? What are the needs of our students in general as it relates to online learning, especially if they're entirely virtual or entirely asynchronous students? What might be missing? A few approaches that we're going to be discussing today. The first one is to think architecturally. And I'm using this sort of acronym here called Make Chowder, which I'll explain in a moment. Then I'm going to promote the idea of thinking like a product designer. And finally, we'll encourage you to start local, creating your own app gap tools based upon your local needs. So when I mentioned think architecturally, a lot of times we think about, especially video meetings, how do we create a equal or equivalent experience to the face-to-face classroom? And I often say, let's not think about equivalent, let's think about parallel. because there may be parallel things, or there may be things that are even better than parallel, which is what I call parallel plus. Because sometimes we can't do the equivalent, but we may be able to do something that is meeting the same need and maybe even meeting it in a better way. So thinking together on these tools, we're going to think architecturally next. And what I mean by architecturally, I'll walk through in a moment using that same Padlet that I put into the chat feed. Again, if you're just arriving, I'll put the Padlet into the chat feed so that you'll be able to access it. Let me do that now. Here we go. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to be thinking architecturally. What I mean by that, I've got a sample classroom on the right. You can see the teacher's desk and some tables that are movable. Maybe you don't have movable tables. Maybe you have a lecture hall. But I want to begin by thinking about a traditional classroom, if you will, and really pausing to think, well, what kind of learning happens? So in terms of the spaces, if we think of learning spaces, where does learning happen in a brick and mortar classroom? And maybe we can use the chat feed for this one, or we could use the Padlet, whatever you prefer. But first, we have our desks. Students are doing all kinds of works at their desks. What is the equivalent of a desk in the virtual experience or the asynchronous experience? If we want them to be working on flip charts, if we want them to be using manipulatives or things with their hands as they're learning and they're remote, what are the things we want to be considering? What is the equivalent of their experience with the overhead? Are they able to present their knowledge on the overhead? How is the whiteboard or the smartboard being used? We also think about walls. And going back to spatial thinking, we have some classrooms at Pima Community College that are entirely covered with whiteboards so that students can go into groups and work out their ideas on the whiteboards, where they can post their work and be recognized for their accomplishments. What is the equivalency within a Zoom space or within a learning management system or within third-party EdTech tools that allow students to do visual thinking on the walls or visual thinking on a flip chart paper? These are things that maybe you have addressed, but maybe you haven't yet. I also put the word windows in because I like the idea that classrooms can look out beyond their walls and engage with the immediate moment that students are in and feel a little more human for a moment. Thinking beyond the learning that happens within the physical classroom, we also need to think about the hallway. I often think, how do we greet our students at the virtual front door of our classes? And what is the equivalent of the hallway or the parallel to the hallway? If we know that students hang out in the hallways, they meet each other before class, maybe they even set up study groups, how do we create opportunities for social learning, which, to be frank, we're not very good at right now when it comes to online learning or distance learning? So how can we create spaces where students can come together authentically and organically to meet each other, to share ideas, to potentially set up study groups, and to have that very important social aspect connected in an informal way before they even begin class? Beyond the hallways, we have the office hour. How do we simulate the capacity for face-to-face time? Do we limit ourselves in our asynchronous teaching to asynchronous experiences within the LMS or are we actively utilizing tools and promoting practices that support one-to-one conferring between the faculty member or the teacher and the student? And what tools do we have that best support that, including scheduling tools? There's so many different kinds of EdTech tools that we can be thinking of, and so many kinds of things we might be able to support our teachers and students with. Beyond the office, we think of the campus. How are we connecting our students to essential campus resources and events, student clubs, et cetera? And what kind of technologies can support that? And then, of course, beyond the campus, there's a community. Is there any technology that would really support our work in the community? Your institution may value service learning or engaging students in the community space in ways that connect their curriculum and their learning with actual needs in their community. Are there tools that you have that help support that? Finally, I like to think about the home environment. And when I do workshops with, even middle school parents of fifth graders, we talk about what supports learning at home and how do we support a more effective learning environment for our students. so that they can be set up for success in their home space or wherever they're working to engage with the learning from your classroom outside of the online or Zoom experience. So as a review, I put together this little acronym, Chowder, as each letter of the word chowder being a different thing. So where would we start thinking about applications and technologies that can support connectivity with our community and our campus? That's a hard one. When I think of hallways, I'm thinking of, again, social learning. What kind of technologies help students know who's in the room? A lot of our LMSs and tools that exist, you don't even know who's in the room when you join. What are some ways in which we can get students to connect with each other informally? And those are controversial questions because some campuses cannot use Discord, cannot use other tools that don't have enterprise licenses. But are you finding ways to meet the needs for social learning at your institution? Are you finding ways to support faculty in setting up office hours and meetings, even through maybe if you have Google or Microsoft Teams and you're able to set up appointment calendars? Sometimes we have to support our faculty in these practices because when we move online, we sometimes forget the importance of having virtual office hours. What else in terms of the walls and whiteboards? I'm looking at visual thinking and what we can call spatial thinking. How do we put our ideas together, and what are the tools we're using? It might be Figma, it might be a Jamboard within a video meeting or a Zoom whiteboard, but what actually works for your students? In terms of what we're doing at our desks or learning stations, if you're in a K-12 space, how do we simulate the best of our face-to-face classroom using the EdTech available? What do they love to do? And are they able to do it remotely or asynchronously, even if they're not sitting around that same table? Finally, in terms of learning aids, we create a lot of things as educators, face-to-face educators, to help our students learn. Maybe there's some things that we can bring technology to the table to address these issues that can help our students. And likewise, another technology question that might seem a little bit odd is what do our students bring into the room? What is in their rucksack or their backpack that helps them engage? And how might we be able to utilize technology that helps them build upon whatever they bring to the table, whatever their funds of knowledge are, whatever their assets are? Again, I'm not entirely nostalgic about the brick and mortar classroom. It has strengths, it has shortcomings, but I'm trying to be really focused on what's working. I don't know what your teachers are creating to aid in learning, but I'm wondering what comes to mind for those of you in the room. Have you heard of any specific things that your teachers are creating to help your students engage? Could be a math teacher, language teacher. Have they shared anything recently with you that kind of excites you about something that they've created where you've wondered, okay, how could an educational technology help support this kind of practice? It's a difficult question, but I just want to pose that out to the room. Feel free to use the chat feed to respond to this one. And actually, I want to step back for a moment because I think we kind of jumped through the last slides a little bit quickly. Looking at the visuals of all of these items, from the outside of the school to the inside of the classroom, or looking at the image, what kind of learning do you think matters in the classroom that you're not addressing through your EdTech tools right now? And what are you? If you could, I'd like you to use our Padlet to sort of dive into this question. Or you can use the chat feed. We're going to be, let me unshare my screen and find it behind this. If you have a moment, when you think about what you're doing right now, architecturally, you might say, well, I'm able to simulate live teaching through Zoom or other kinds of tools. And you might even say, well, our faculty are utilizing the whiteboard tool within Zoom, or they might be using other approaches. But what are they doing in terms of the architecture? Somebody wrote hallways and water cooler discussion threads, which is a really interesting idea. How do we use any kind of interactive discussions tool to support social learning that is informal and So in terms of the discussion threads, for whoever posted this, excuse me, I'll leave it there. Which tools are you using to promote informal, easy discussion? And I will click enter there, if I get my spelling correct. If you could think about a space within your architecture, it could be the desks, the work that would happen in a face-to-face space, the walls, the windows. Write one word, and then what tool are you using to simulate or address that specific practice? And maybe you're not. Maybe you're like, okay, this is a gap. We're not addressing the needs of the hallway. We have no ways to help our students get to know each other really, except through the dreaded threaded discussion experience. Granted, you can have great threaded discussions as well. Maybe that is your solution to it, but maybe you have other third-party tools that you're bringing in to help create more interactive discussions. Again, as you post into the Padlet, type the word walls or desks or windows and think about something that your EdTech suite is currently addressing. I'll share as an example, in terms of office hours, I have been using Google's appointment calendar, and I've been using Calendly. I'm quite pleased with the new version of Google Appointment Calendar, which is built into our Google Suite. But there are other tools that are emerging that people have been using. If you found a solution that works for you to simulate the office hour or to help schedule and let students self-select the times that they're doing one-to-ones, that'd be really interesting to know. Whether it's an enterprise solution or not, it may just be something you're using. Same kinds of questions in terms of how do you simulate visual thinking? Does anybody have any mind mapping tools that you're using, or sort of collaborative whiteboard tools? Is anybody using Google Drawing to support students as a solution if you're not wanting to use a fancier tool? Let's go back to the Padlet and see what folks are sharing. Again, when you get a chance, please hop in and share one tool that you think is addressing what's happening in these architectural spaces. I want to think with you together about what's working and what's not. So I'm coming back into this space. And first off, we have Brightspace discussion groups. I use those, and I think I use them quite well in all kinds of ways. So that's one thing that we can do. I'm not entirely satisfied with them. I always like to try new interactive discussion tools and third-party tools. Because I'm not sure that the discussions tool is as useful for informal discussion. I've tried, by the way, the activity feed that you can utilize on your home screen. But there may be some third-party tools you're trying, and that's what we want to try to elicit here today. Built-in discussions into the Canvas LMS is what our IT supports, though we have faculty also using Teams and free Slack channels for water cooler banter. Anybody using any other back channel tools right now for your students to support informal discussions that are, the equivalent of what would happen in the hallway, like more social as opposed to focused on a specific activity? So we have office hours and Piazza live sessions listed by another person in the room. We have Margot Gregory mentioning Harmonize, which is a terrific tool for student-generated inquiry. As a side plug, I should pull this up. Harmonize is terrific for a lot of different use cases. We were talking about ping pong previously, and I really enjoyed one of the employees at Harmonize for the way they introduced their tool and the exciting use cases that are available for it. I'm not going to say more about it or try to promote the tool. I just want to celebrate any specific idea that's being shared. Coggle for mind mapping is one thing that I want to share with you all. Office hours, people are using Appointlet. Zoom open office hours for the appointlets. Then argument mapping. Again, this is an emerging need that I don't think most of us have figured out solutions for. How do we support students doing thinking on the equivalent of a flip chart virtual flip charts, virtual whiteboards, infinite whiteboards for thinking. Somebody else wrote Slack and Discord as the way to support hallways. And I'm curious, for the person that wrote Slack and Discord, are you using these institutionally and formally? I imagine Slack might be an institutional solution. I'm not sure, but if you are, please let us know if you're using it formally. I'm going to go back to the chat feed and see what folks are saying as it's coming in. So Adam notes the idea of a K-12 teacher-centered, rather than an escape room, a K-12 teacher-centered break-in box with a series of clues that a class had to solve together. Adam, I'd love to know more about that. Again, that's sort of stepping beyond the crisis towards things that might be play-based and interactive in ways that are more dynamic than a regular LMS can support. Adam, do you want to share more in the text feed or via audio or video?
Yeah, I can. I mean, it was just a presentation that I saw. I thought it was a really innovative way of thinking about, play and project-based learning. Who's having his students struggle grasping math concepts and used this kind of break-in box to get them excited about it. I think so. Part of that is that idea of play and collaboration and helping them learn without it feeling like work. And trying to think about tools in that way. What kind of tools are natural and intuitive and fun because it fits with what students already enjoy.
So if students are having fun in the classroom, again, these are the things we bring in as teachers to make it fun. What apps help support play-based learning or discovery learning? I'll pose this as a question into this little feed. Does anything come to mind for you where you're like, okay, this is a tool that can support escape rooms. This is a tool that can support a slight competitive environment that is low stakes, that helps students engage, whether they're on a Zoom or asynchronously, whether it's a polling and a clicker tool. We want to think with you about what you're using. And if you want to share anything that comes to mind, again, when you post, your name is anonymous unless you're logged in to this tool. Anything else come to mind in the chat feed? Folks mentioned Kahoot, which is a great tool. My daughter is in 9th grade and her teachers use Kahoot really well. These are wonderful tools, and they do create sometimes equity issues. Again, if students have different devices with different, wireless speeds, but there's all the same, they're a lot of fun. And so how do we find ways to use them equitably and bring them in, even for our face-to-face classes? We have other folks sharing Breakout EDU and iClicker, also H5P, maybe. It's a great interactive tool if you haven't played with it yet, and has a tremendous range of things that you could call digital manipulatives instead of physical ones, things that you're clicking on, moving things around on the screen to support your own learning and reflection and process. Does anyone want to share anything more about play-based learning or tools that you like to support a sense of play? Maybe even using Quizlet to support students studying and quizzing each other. Or you have some other solution for doing flashcards. There's so many things that we need to be thinking about, especially as enrollment pivots towards fully online or fully or predominantly non-in-person teaching. How do we bring the best of what we've got to the table using the tech available? All right, so moving forward to the next screen, we're going to return. So we did a quick little thought or pause. This is something you can do with your faculty or yourself, where you just pause and think, okay, what are all the things that our students do at their desks when they're learning? And how might we be able to support that through an EdTech tool, especially if they're taking fully virtual classes or classes that are outside of the classroom that are asynchronous. So moving ahead towards the thinking like a product designer question. Product design brings us a lot of, I think, distance from our teaching. We can pull back and look at needs assessments in a different kind of way. So some things you might be able to do depending on your capacity, and I'm not sure about your roles in the room. Actually, before we go further, I want to see from folks in the room, maybe you could put in the chat feed, what is your role at your institution? Are you an educator? Are you an EdTech administrator? Are you an instructional designer? Are you in leadership in some capacity? Do you make decisions about tech just for your students, or do you make decisions college-wide? I'd love to know that. So in the room, we have EdTech administrators, we have instructional technologists, we have folks working in educational technology. We don't have as many teachers in the room that are just teachers, which is interesting. So I should angle around towards that. Previous grad student, new instructional designer, EdTech. So it looks like so far from the people that are responding, it's mostly EdTech people. So you may have the capacity, more capacity than your faculty do, to dive in and do things like this. Doing surveys of current stakeholders in this process, which runs perhaps across the college, doing one-to-one UX interviews that could include usability testing, where you see how they're utilizing the tools that you're trying to bring forward, doing card sorting activities, etc. Doing smaller focus groups where you talk with them about their shared experience using a tool, running pilots. And again, Adam is in the room. Brad Butler is also here. They run pilots at our institution, are doing a fabulous job gathering data that helps us make the case for why we keep a technology or why we let it go. You can do surveys, you can do diary studies, you can do all kinds of things with pilots. Broader questions to think about in terms of the design piece might be, how are students able to explore, like they might in a face-to-face classroom or on their own? Are they able to collaborate with each other within the tools that are available? Are they able to really process what they're learning? Are they able to apply what they're learning to new contexts? And do our tools support that? So those are kind of broad questions you might return to, as a lot of product designers in EdTech do, Bloom's taxonomy. And this is a version, the digital version of the taxonomy, where we're thinking about those higher order skills of how do we help them utilize tools to actually create, evaluate, or apply and analyze their knowledge in ways that are meaningful, not necessarily just to the instructor of record, but beyond the classroom. So another thought is, are these tools helping students create their portfolio for their next steps beyond the college? Are they able to help students create digital learning artifacts that could be shared with future students? If your faculty believe in open pedagogy, what kinds of things can students create and share forward with future students that demonstrate their knowledge beyond the traditional paper or exam? So again, designers tend to use the word UX. I promote the word, or the phrase PX, for pedagogical experiences, as opposed to user experience. And when I think about pedagogical experiences, I'm not thinking just about students as end users, but also teachers. What do our teachers need from these tools? And we don't know unless we find out, unless we engage our teachers directly on their challenges with previous tools, their desires for future tools, the things that they wish existed. And so again, to close this piece out, I would strongly encourage you all, if you haven't yet, to take a moment to pause and engage with your faculty around what you've got, and think about the ways in which you might promote or support or even incentivize teacher engagement as it relates to these questions. Because you're not going to know on your own what's working and what's going to be easy to adopt unless the teachers have a strong sense, or instructors have a strong sense of that they're valued as stakeholders, that their adoption of these tools makes a difference for the college overall. So we're going to pivot now to thinking about building your own app gap tool. And I want to think together with you on this tool. Again, let me make sure that the Padlet is in the chat feed. Do this one more time. Okay, so we want to think about pedagogical experience, app gaps, and app focal points. What is your main focus so far? And I'll share an example with you to dig into that, thinking more broadly around the needs of our students, imagining, even before we do the survey of our students, what might be helpful. So pulling back to my suggestions here on the app gap, it doesn't have to be, whoops, my screen share did not entirely work through. Let me do this again. Whatever you're creating, I think needs to start from scratch, needs to just start today. And that's what I would recommend you doing if you haven't already, is to create or open a Word document or a Google document and start brainstorming what you've got and what you'd like to get in the future, just so you yourself can know the range of what's possible within the tools that we've got. To be frank, a lot of these tools that are emerging for our faculty may be even unimaginable. The idea of being able to keep time-stamped or text-stamped comments and have dialogue within a shared text is fascinating and very new. So as we become aware of the new tools that are available and the needs for students to do better digital marginalia, whatever your values are at your institution, whatever they're trying to do in your reading classes, your science classes, your math classes, we need to pause and think, is there an ed tech that can support this better, especially for the student who cannot be in the room for whatever reason? So I would recommend starting today in a Google document, sharing this document forward with thought partners within your institution and beyond your institution, and supporting faculty in doing direct inquiry too. As examples for this, we'll take a look at this tool, which is just a boring Google Doc, where we started thinking out loud about, okay, so what are some things that we're doing? What are some possible tools that can be used to meet these kinds of needs? And as a parallel, we run a 5-week class at our institution for faculty, where we ask our faculty to think, okay, what tools might you be able to use to address the needs of your students? And this is a great space where we can pull ideas from emerging thought leaders that really care about what's next for tech, who might be more willing to pilot whatever the enterprise solutions are that we're going to advance forward. So this is, again, a 5-week class that is, these are 15 to 20 hours, all of our faculty development courses, but it gives them a chance every week to review a different tool and then share those reviews with their peers and build a professional learning community, create a buzz around, this is something cool I'm using now to try to meet this need. Moving backwards to the sample tool, I'm going to open up a sample, and then I want to revisit our Padlet and have you all think together and share what your perceived gaps are as of this present moment. And I'll just walk through some initial ideas from this. You see here in the side, little conversations I've had with Adam and with people from other institutions, where we're actively thinking about what are the tools that might work best for us. I'm going to zoom in as much as possible here. So most of us have some kind of a live meeting solution. You may have solutions for lecture capture and video management. You may have, as somebody mentioned previously, the use of Kahoot or other tools to create front-facing or asynchronous polls. You may have clicking solutions. You may have flashcard tools that you're using or supporting for your students so that they can practice learning. I'll scroll through these very quickly. My goal here is for each of you to share, well, what is something that you do have? And what is something that you don't and that you wish you had? Just from your own position as a technologist or as someone making decisions about technology or institution. Do you have tools to support collaborative learning and gamification? Do you have tools that support interactive video like Play, Pause It, or Edpuzzle, where you can pause in the middle and ask questions of your students or engage them in learning as they watch a video? Do you have things to support branch learning? Do you have things to support interactive HTML or the creation of their own websites? Do you have digital manipulatives of any kind to support learning? Do you have tools that support simulations of any kind in your classroom or virtual reality experiences if those are needed at your institution? Do you have tools to support any kind of collaborative annotation or engagement on a shared space? If so, are they being used? Is your tool adequate? As we go through, please go ahead and use the chat feed as we start, or you could jump into our piece. And I would like you to share, okay, well, what is one thing that we have? So you might say, well, we have a video-based live video solution. And at our institution, we have 3, which is interesting. We have Zoom, we have Google Meet, and we utilize Bongo within our third-party solution. What are you using? What are your solutions that you're addressing? Or what are you not addressing in terms of something that feels like a gap for you? So please pop into this space as we go through these, and again, share if any of these things are things that you have or things you would like to have. Or if there's topics that are not listed in this app gap document that you feel like, hey, this is a big gap. What is the area that you're trying to address? So again, so far I've mentioned the idea of how do we handle our videos? Because Zoom is not forever. So you may have a video management solution that allows you to reuse video content or to allow students to create videos. Those are things to think about. Interactives that help with polling, with getting formative assessments from your students. Thinking about ways that we can support gamifying the classroom or supporting collaborative learning. And again, I mentioned a number of pieces here. Again, if one of these comes to mind, you think, okay, this is something that is cool that we really don't have a solution for at the enterprise level. What is that thing that you're seeking? And again, I would strongly recommend as you build out your own list of ideas, maybe even share this with your faculty as you think about, okay, well, what are some spaces that they really value that they wish there was a tool to support for their virtual or their distance learners? Again, they might be tools that support interactive video, as I said previously, things that support labs of some kind, things that support peer collaboration around a shared text, things that support interactive visual platforms, whiteboards, brainstorming, mind maps. Some people have shared some of these already, or even things that you can use to create infographics if you want your students to be creating infographics in the classroom. Video editing software and digiting solutions. We didn't have one a year ago. So we were leaning on third-party tools like Loom and Screencast-O-Matic. And then we pivoted to another solution so that students can create videos in a tool that we feel is secure and accessible and, all the same. Do you have a solution for how do you support video editing or digital storytelling of any kind? If you're doing cool stuff with digital storytelling, in other words, every social issue in our society can be mappable. Everything is geospatial. Are you using any tools to support the mapping processes that students might need to engage in or need to know how to do as soon as they leave your program? Do you have video management solutions? And again, as you see these topics as they come through, please go ahead and drop into the Padlet something you're doing or something you'd like to do, if anything comes to mind. So we mentioned being able to create diagrams, being able to create animations. We mentioned something that allows you to build tutorials. I did not mention that yet, but that's one that somebody added to this list. Thinking about what are our tools that we're able to use for XR, any kind of extended reality experience. That's an emerging piece. Just like AI, we'll see a lot happening with XR and AI, and probably the intersection of those two in the very near future. Are you using 360 stills or 360 video in your classroom so that you can take a live shot of a physical space? At our institution, for example, we take stills of workplace scenarios, even classrooms, where we ask students to walk into the room and say, well, what is happening in this classroom? How is it designed to support learning? Or where are the hazards that you would identify if this might be an issue? So we're letting folks click around inside a video space to see all around in all directions. Are you promoting podcasting? Do you have audio editing solutions? Do you have, again, we started to talk about digital artifacts previously, but what are your tools to support students in creating and sharing their work? Maybe you have art faculty that need to be able to do virtual exhibits. Maybe all of your classes would benefit from having a website creation opportunity instead of just paper writing as a way of demonstrating knowledge. So what do you promote? Or what do you enable at your institution for students to create website artifacts? Or is it a student choice model? That's something also to keep in mind in terms of what range of choice you want to engage with your students, because they may know best which tools they need to use after they graduate from your institution. So they need to learn them. And maybe we need to pivot and also learn from our students directly on what specific apps they feel like they need to learn to use for their careers as it relates to the jobs that are posted in their fields. So we mentioned podcasting, social media tools. Not all of these will be relevant to you, and it won't be relevant to all your faculty, but they may be relevant to specific faculty within your division. So other things that we jotted down: how do we recognize students with virtual pats on the back? What are our badging tools? How do we support socialization among our students? In other words, the hallway kinds of experiences. And it might be even like these are examples that we listed here spontaneously of the kind of tools where if your icons are in proximity to each other within a 3D or 2D space, then you suddenly start a video. There's all kinds of cool stuff that's emerging. Do you have a class messenger tool? So you can informally send a message to a student and they can send you back a message without them having to share their home phone number or their home text information. Do you have proctoring solutions? Do you have that are equitable? Do you have audio readers or other kinds of assistive technologies that are college-wide? If you don't, which ones would be the most important for you to bring forward? Do you have anything that's supporting the creation of OER content or open pedagogy content at your institution? What do you promote for students that relates to managing their research or citations? Again, this is just a bunch of stuff, but this was our local brainstorm. And I want to model for you the importance that creating your own little tool can be a great starting point. It doesn't have to be comprehensive, but it may be a space where you allows your faculty, like in the EdTech class that I teach, to pause and think, oh, I didn't think about the importance of that when I moved into a virtual classroom or when I moved into a fully asynchronous classroom. My students still need that, even if they're never in the room with me. What can I use to help them meet that need? So I'm going to come back to our Padlet, see if we've got some comments coming through. We've got live video solutions with the first one that I mentioned. Yuja for video management, editing, and storage. Great to hear. Web-based video editors. Great to see. Using Kaltura Media Space for video creation, editing, and sharing. Zoom meeting can also be uploaded to that platform. Somebody else mentions DIY XR experiences that make it possible. I'd love to know, in terms of the DIY, where is the DIY coming from? Is there specific tools that you promote for XR, or is that more of a student choice where you encourage them to use any tools that are available to promote that? I'm going to go back to the chat feed to see if anyone's posted comments into that, or we can stick with the actual Padlet. I think we have about 10 minutes to go in this session, maybe a little bit less. Hopefully this is helping you pause and think about where your gaps. And maybe one thing we could do is in the chat feed, or if folks could share, where do you feel like your current gaps are, the things that you're not hitting at your institution on a personal level before you gather more data from your teachers or your students? What are you not quite hitting yet? If anyone would like to share in the chat feed or unmute yourself.
I'm going to share, I've seen in the past, you make one of the key points is to actually talk with faculty and students about what their needs are, particularly faculty and their pedagogical needs. And quite often over the years, I've seen decisions made on EdTech without doing that vital first step.
Thank you, Bob.
And then you get tools that faculty don't want to use, and you've wasted money. Or I've also seen faculty talk with, the EdTech people, IT, whatever, and say, oh, I just came back for a conference. I saw this really nifty tool. We need to get this. And they'll go spend money on it. And, that may be the only person who ever is going to use that tool.
How many people in the room have
And
seen
you
what
end
Bob
up
is?
with a kind of willy-nilly mishmash of tools that cost a lot of money, but don't really do what you need it to do.
I just love to know from the people in the room, Kate, Brett, Brad, Margot, Leah, or Lindsay, or Adam, or Deborah. Have you ever seen that at other institutions where it seems like it's a willy-nilly, you saw something at a conference and let's try it out, rather than a more careful process where we're trying to learn? I see a lot. Oh my goodness. We see this quite a bit. Same every week. Oh yeah. And yep. So thank you, Bob, for that point.
Yeah,
I think
right, and to add, there is often no long-term vision. It is this week we're going to buy this, next week we'll buy that, and so forth. But there's no looking 5 years down the road and how we're going to meet the needs of faculty and students.
Thank you, Bob. And I think some of us are trying to build out, and we are at our institution building out formal processes that are even in connectivity with procurement, with accessibility, with all the divisions of the college, so that as we move stuff forward, we have a process that involves piloting and comparing different tools. Adam and Brad, who are both on the call, I'm sure could speak much better to that. For this workshop, my main goal was to engage everybody in the room, whether you're a teacher or a EdTech decision maker, on thinking about the broad scope of needs that we might not be meeting in our virtual and our asynchronous classes. A final note as we close today, relating to this whole inquiry process, is once we've got an idea of what the needs are, we still need to keep digging in and doing a close review of which tools are meeting those needs. I'll share this in a moment, but I would encourage you to think about equity and all the possible aspects of equity, so that you're promoting equitable learning through your tools. Again, any tool can be something that opens doors, or tools that actually close doors. We don't want our EdTech to be gatekeeping tools. We want them to be gate opening tools. And I published an article at Campus Technology last year in May that suggests 14 different questions that we want to consider for our EdTech, focusing on different kinds of equity or privilege disparities among our students. And so this is a specific tool that I'll share as a link promoting the ideas of tech equity, which is looking at how do students with different broadband device, or their ease of use, or their pocketbook issues, what are the different questions we want to consider to make sure that every student who's accessing this tool will have fair and equal access to the tools that we're bringing forward. I'm not going to share more about this, Bob, because we're out of time, but I will share a link to the article in a moment, or I guess we could just Google it here, which is just called, I'll just type the word 14 and equity, and there it is, and I'll pop it into the chat feed. But this is an article that just is food for thought around how are we making these choices as it relates to our students, so that we're not reinforcing disparities that are outside of the classroom with the technologies we bring into the classroom. Any questions as we close up for the group?
I got to jump in again, Reed, too.
Yep.
I just want to say you made a point early on about, there's often this effort to recreate the physical classroom online. And it really should be parallel things, that because first off, you'll never be able to create, the physical classroom online. You shouldn't waste your time trying to do that. Do the things that you can do online that maybe you can't do in a physical classroom. Emphasize that and don't try to recreate it. And I've been in situations where they spend a lot of money trying to recreate it and are never successful.
Thank you, Bob. That's a great point. Bob, we had one question from Brett before you go, and thanks for the kind words, Brett. Will we be sharing the recording link, or is there a way for Brett to access the video after the fact?
Yeah, hopefully by the end of the day, when you go back to the schedule of sessions, you'll see the link will have changed from join session to view recording. And believe it or not, that means you can actually view the recording of the session.
Great to hear. For those of you who'd like to be in touch, please feel free to reach out to me via Twitter. I'd love to continue the discussion with all of you. And thanks for having me, Bob. Appreciate it.
And thank you so much for doing this. As you can tell, I was excited about it because I've bumped into those issues over the years, and they're really frustrating. Best thing I ever did was sit down and actually talk with faculty about what they needed. Then my job was to find the tools to accomplish what they need. Same thing with surveying students. What do you need? What needs aren't being met? That kind of thing. And they were often very different things between faculty and students. Anyway, as you can tell, I get excited about this topic.
I do too. I do
Thank
too.
you. I appreciate you doing this.
Thanks, Bob.
So next up, Wall Street Journal has a session in just a few minutes if you'd like to drop in. Otherwise, I'll see you later for the next session.